Welcome back. You know, when a train hits a car or a person, the results are usually disastrous. The mass of a train, it is so large that some kind of physical damage is basically inevitable, no matter the collision. It doesn't even speak to the mental anguish that comes out of these collisions, and so we want to give you a sense of this issue. Back in 2019, Rosie Nguyen reported on the fallout from train accidents. So we're going to start our In Focus discussion tonight with that report.
We are following breaking news. Reports of a man in his 40s killed by a front-runner train.
It's a headline we hear all too often.
A man who was likely on his cell phone was hit and killed by a front-runner train.
Preventable collisions that turn fatal. Officials with Utah Transit Authority say they encounter close calls almost daily.
Most of the time, it's really just a case of somebody who's being distracted.
One could say it's an inherent risk that comes with the job of being an operator at Utah Transit Authority. But for Light Rail Controller Supervisor Ryan Wagner, it's a risk he tries not to think about.
It was probably about 9 months before I got on a train again. And, to this day, I seek help.
Wagner is talking about the traumatic incident that took place nearly 8 years ago. It was June 2011 when he was training with an instructor on a TRAX train. They were approaching the Jordan Valley crossing in West Jordan when
we had noticed that 2 younger pedestrians had walked in front of the train, and the second they stepped out, it was already too late.
The impact killed one of those pedestrians, 15-year-old Shariah Casper. Wagner became overwhelmed with guilt after he had just welcomed a second child into the world with his wife.
I sat there and told myself, why did I deserve to have my kids when I just operated something that took somebody else's away?
Shariah's death remained in headlines for weeks while her father was advocating for improved pedestrian safety in the area. But in the meantime, no one from the public knew how Wagner was suffering at home.
You can't sleep at night. You have so much going through your head that you need help to process everything.
Data obtained by ABC4 News shows UTA bus, TRAX, and front-runner operators are involved in an average of 7 fatal collisions per year. Suicides made up 25% of those fatalities in the last 5 years, and nearly 40% of those fatalities were caused by someone trespassing.
It means a lot to them. So when something tragic happens, they're affected just like any other person, you or I would be.
Archie says UTA provides mental health services for their operators with no required timeline for returning to work following a traumatic incident. He says some never return to work, but those who do?
Some can't get back into the cab, but by and large, I would say most of them come back, and they're strong people. They care about what we do as an organization, what the mission is, and they love their jobs.
After only a few weeks, Wagner returned to work, but it took him 9 months before he could get on a train. Now, as a light rail controller supervisor, he looks after the employees who once sat in the seat that he once did. Even though he doesn't know if he'll ever fully heal, he's sharing his story, hoping it will save someone else's life.
My outlook is always to make sure everyone's safe, to make sure that they're educated and understand why things are done the way they're done.
Reporting for ABC4 News, I'm Rosie Nguyen.
Coming up next, we're going to talk about safety around trains. You heard that story. You know what an important issue this is. We're going to speak with a representative of the Utah Transit Authority. That is coming up next after the break. Thanks everybody for sticking with us tonight. This is our second In Focus discussion segment, and it's about rail safety. We're joined now by Sheldon Shaw over Zoom. Sheldon's the Director of Safety and Security for the Utah Transit Authority. Sheldon, thanks for carving out some time for us tonight. I want to start with the numbers here. Where are we with collisions this year, vehicle, pedestrian, and then can we talk how many are TRAX versus front runner? So hopefully not too much for you there, but wanting to know the numbers.
Hey, Nick, thank you for having me, and also thanks for covering this important subject, and it's an important subject for not just UTA, but all the railroads out there. We all have issues with people making mistakes in front of us, and you alluded to our stopping distances and our size and our weight, and it's true that our operators become victims along with those who make mistakes in front of us. Over the last 5 years, Frontrunners had 25 collisions, and Trax has had 90 collisions. Those are combined with vehicles and or trespassers. This year, our numbers are much better. We've only had 3 on commuter rail Frontrunner and 10 on Trax, so we're trending in a better direction in our systems specifically.
Are we seeing any trends with these kind of collisions? I know you said only 3 this year. COVID upended just about everything, so I wonder if that has anything to do with it. But are they going up or down from previous years?
Well, I'd love to speak to some national numbers here. So if we look back to 1972, there were over 12,000 collisions at railroad crossings across America. In 2019, that number has dropped all the way down to 2,200. That represents an 82% decline in collisions at railroad crossings across America. And so as a country, as railroads across this country, we're doing a great job. We use engineering, we use education, we use enforcement. We use a lot of tools to try to reduce those collisions, and they are going down nationally. It's a great story.
Well, that is a great story. I have to imagine, though, even one is just a horrible tragedy, especially when it is a deadly collision. I wonder if we could talk about the cause of these accidents. I wonder, how does distraction play into some of these collisions? And then it's a tough subject to talk about, but we know sometimes folks die by suicide in front of a train.
So distracted behavior, Nick, is a huge problem in society. It's a problem. I think it's impossible to drive down I-15 and not see somebody texting and or checking their email while they're driving, putting the rest of us at risk. Just talking on your phone puts you at risk. Here at UTA, we have zero tolerance for using a phone and operating a vehicle. It becomes a much more problem for us if you're distracted and you're getting on or off our platforms. And so as you walk to the end of the platform and you have your earbuds in and you're listening to your music and you're checking your emails and you don't hear the train that's coming in from the other direction and you walk out in front of it, much like the story you showed previously, it's tragedies happen, and you're right, even one is too many, and we're working hard every day to try to make sure we don't have any more.
Do you ever see cases where somebody is trying to beat a train, where they're like, I don't have time, I'm going to take my chances, and obviously that FedEx vehicle, absolutely hard to watch that, just getting cleaved in half. How often does that happen where someone's trying to beat the train?
So those things do happen. Pedestrians try to run and beat the train because they see it coming. They want to be able to catch that train coming into the platform and want to make sure they catch it. Oftentimes they're not paying attention to a train that might be coming from the other direction, and so you're really taking your life into your hands if you're not standing on the platform waiting for the train. Cars sometimes decide to do that, but if you take a look at our commuter rail line, what you'll see is that we have raised curbing as you approach railroad crossings. And so it makes it much more difficult for a vehicle to try to go around a down gate. And so I think we prevent a lot of those kind of decisions by folks by making it more difficult to try and go around a down gate.
Yeah, well, I know that in the media sometimes we can be reactive. If there's a crash, we're going to go to the scene, ask you questions, get interviews, get some footage of that. But let's go and focus here. Let's talk about what you're doing proactively behind the scenes to prevent these. Let's talk about training. What do you put your drivers through to avoid the collisions? What resources are available for those, like we saw in the last segment, suffering from PTSD who were involved in one of those collisions?
Right. So our train operators are highly trained. It's a very long curriculum. Not everyone makes it through our training. We do follow-up training throughout the year. There's efficiency testing, rules checks, recertifications that happen. And so we have a highly qualified set of engineers and operators here at UTA, and really they're heroes. They help get everyone to work and to appointments, and they work throughout COVID, and they're out there getting the job done each day, and I can't sing their praises enough.
So do you have plans to expand rail service? And if so, how are you going to incorporate collision safety into that equation as it gets more complex?
Well, if there are extensions, we have design criteria. We look to do things like grade separate. If we're going to build a new line and it's going to cross a busy road, then we want to put a bridge bridge either with a train over the top or the vehicles over the top. That way we don't have interactions between cars and trains and pedestrians at that intersection. Of course, we'll look to put in active grade crossings with lights and bells and gates like we do throughout our system. In fact, for Front Runner, we have 72 of those. In Tracks, we have 138 active railroad crossings, so that we have those engineering solutions out there to prevent accidents and to make sure the public is safe, working towards that number of 0.
And I had a question because COVID did just blow up the world as we knew it. And I'm wondering how employment is at UTA. Are you looking for people? I know that training is extensive, but I have to imagine folks could maybe make a decent living after all that training working in such a highly technical field. Anything about employment right now as far as the bigger picture?
So we are hiring. If you go to rideuta.com, you'll see that we're hiring operators, we're hiring mechanics. We're always on the lookout for quality individuals to come and help us accomplish our mission. That's a great question for us. And if I could work in Operation Lifesaver, probably our best safety partner for UTA rail system and railroads across the country is Operation Lifesaver. That's a nonprofit organization of volunteers who go out and do rail safety presentations to educate the public about the dangers of railroad crossings and so they don't make mistakes in front of us. And Utah Operation Lifesaver does a great job.
And we're going to speak to them just after the break. 30 seconds, final thoughts.
Thanks again for covering this very, very important subject. And if I could just get one word out there to the public is that if you find yourself in a railroad crossing with the gates down, either in front of you or behind you, please don't panic. Go ahead and hit the gas and drive through our gates. It'll do very little damage to your car. Most likely you won't break the gate. But if you wait for the train, we're going to come with a lot of speed and momentum. So don't panic. Get out of there.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. So you're giving us the blessing to get out of there if that happens. God forbid. Hopefully it doesn't. Sheldon Shaw, thank you so much from UTA. We will be right back. Again, thanks so much for your time. And we have more on this In Focus topic just ahead. Welcome back to our In Focus conversation about rail safety tonight. Joining us now in studio, Vern Keisler, Executive Director of Utah Operation Lifesaver. And Vern, thanks so much for making the time to be with us tonight.
Great to be here tonight.
Awesome. I can't wait to talk to you about this because it's so fascinating. You don't think about it until you see something and then it's super traumatic. I imagine you must have been affected by all these tragedies, these collisions. Operation Lifesaver, give us the rundown of what that is.
Well, Utah Operation Lifesaver has been a consistent voice for rail safety education in the state of Utah since 1976. We're a nonprofit organization with wonderful state safety partners in Utah.
Well, we just spoke with UTA about these incidents. Can we talk about the national collisions, kind of the big picture, the 40,000-foot view, so to speak, of some of these numbers in these collisions?
Yeah, last year we had over 200 fatalities just at railroad grade crossings, and we had another 700 trespassing on the railroad tracks nationally. Now, those numbers are alarming and they're awful. But since 1975, we've seen that number come down by 80% nationwide and 82% in the state of Utah.
Why?
Outreach and education, I think, plays a major role in that. Furthermore, we're engineering our crossings better with lights and gates and bells and warning those drivers approaching the railroad crossing.
I imagine a lot of that costs money. Is this a local a funding issue? Where does the money come from for the education and then also for some of the improvements around all these crossings?
For education, our money comes from our safety partners like Utah Transit Authority, Utah Department of Transportation, State Board of Education because we're in their driver's ed classes. Nationally, it comes from the federal government. It's called Section 130 funds to improve the highway rail grade crossings. And that has been in place for many years and because of decades actually, and it's really improved the crossings across the United States.
I know it gets into the weeds, but the stuff doesn't happen without the cash, so just ask that question. Okay, there's lots of different categories in these incidents, right, by the Federal Railroad Administration. There's these highway rail crossings, those collisions. There's trespassing, and then the one that's just, it's so tragic because it seems to be the one you hear most often when there's a deadly collision is suicide. Can you talk about the differences, the distinctions in those categories and some of the numbers?
You bet. Here in Utah, last year we had 13 collisions at the railroad crossings, resulting in 3 fatalities and 12 injuries, and that's just at the railroad crossings themselves. We have other people that trespass on the railroad property, and they're walking on the tracks, and sometimes they don't hear the train, and the train comes up behind them and they get killed. And so last year we had 2 fatalities trespassing on the railroad tracks. And then unfortunate is the suicides. And the suicides last year in 2020 in the state of Utah, we had 5 suicides. And not only do they impact family and friends and entire communities, but they really impact the locomotive engineer and the conductor, those people on the train crew or on the train that are train crew members. It's something they have to live with their entire lives.
I can see the emotion in your face. I mean, I can tell you know these people, you feel what they feel. Can you talk about some of those emotions that they go through that people at home don't really understand?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard locomotive engineers say the last thing they saw was the light in their eyes. And that results in a very difficult emotional situation for those locomotive engineers and conductors. And some will never ever get back on the train again because they just can't deal with that. They don't want that to ever happen again.
You think of PTSD as something that soldiers see in Afghanistan or something, and then you realize that a collision, you know, something that you'd never even expect when you woke up that day as an operator could just absolutely alter your life like that. Can we talk about the financial costs of one of these crashes? Obviously the emotional burden, if people are on that train, for the person in front and obviously the families, but I mean, what is the cost here? If the car tries to run a track and it's hit by a train, is there legal action? Could the driver be liable for this?
Well, not only is there personal liability that could result, but unfortunately what happens is the personal property is destroyed, and these crossings with lights, gates, and signals, they cost $300,000 to $500,000 per crossing. And oftentimes when there's an incident, those automatic gates and signals get taken out, especially if it's between a truck and a train. And then you know how impactful a truck and a train is. What we end up getting is sometimes a derailment. And that results in millions of dollars, not to mention if the train is carrying hazardous materials, an entire community could be evacuated.
It's just striking when you look at these images, because you don't think about it until you see these images or if someone you know is involved in this. So this is what you do every day. But we know that modifying behavior is really hard, especially with drivers. Like you said, you drive down the road, people are on their phone. What works? What suggestions do you have for people driving near or across rails? What can you say that will resonate with someone and possibly change their behavior?
Well, we're in all the driver's ed classes in the state of Utah, and these are new young drivers, and we give them the lesson, about an hour-long presentation. What's great about that is we teach them how to maneuver safely across a railroad crossing. And we're the only state in the country that has a state law that requires, if you take driver's ed from a public high school, you're required to have 1 hour of railroad crossing safety instruction, and we fulfill that obligation.
You know what's wild? My driver's ed teacher's name was Dennis, and I remember one thing, and he said that a car is a 2,000-pound killing machine. That's the only thing I remember from driver's ed, but it stuck with me, and it made me remember how important it is to be safe. Okay, final thoughts. We have 30 seconds left. I apologize for rambling there.
Oh, we want to let people know that it can take a mile or longer for a train to come to a complete stop, and these trains are now 1 to 2 miles long, so they can even take longer to come to a stop. So when then someone pulls out in front of a train, all the locomotive engineer can do is blow the whistle and apply the brakes, but it's going to be more than a mile until that train comes to a complete stop.
Wow. Well, Vern Keisler, thank you so much for that perspective. Really fascinating stuff, and thinking about those engineers. So important to be safe out there. You're the Executive Director of Operation Lifesaver. Thank you for coming down, talking with us tonight about rail safety.
Thank you.
Okay. Don't forget, folks, we'd love to hear from you about this show. We want you to join our Facebook group by searching ABC4 in Focus. We love the topics that we delve into because we want them to be a conversation and to resonate with you. So talk to us so we can give you better stories out there and have this conversation. You can obviously email us as well, infocus at abc4.com.